Welcome to Haxby Shed. I'd like to tell you about my Harrison 140 lathe, how I chose it, how it arrived, how I stripped it down and renovated it, and generally what I think about it. Sorry to be speaking so much off camera, but there's no moving parts to film here, and I think it's better with a bit of atmosphere in the workshop than it is speaking to a computer screen. Quite early on I decided that lathes such as the Myford lathes, for me, could be a bit small. I wanted a lathe with a clutch and with a gap. Ideally I wanted a lathe with the screw cutting gearbox running in oil and the saddle in oil, but that was a kind of nice to have for me. So I sort of ruled out Colchester Student as too big, Bantam not having a clutch, and it's not quite as big as this in my view. And I didn't have a Harrison in mind to start with. I was really sure that I would buy a Colchester. But I came round to the idea that Harrison was really what I wanted. It's a small lathe with a lot of big features. Anyway, I went through the normal process of looking on eBay, Gumtree, anywhere else, classified ads. And where I did see a lathe come up, it was too far away quite often, or it was in bad condition or whatever. Oh, that was another thing, I wanted a metric lathe. Anyway, this came up on eBay, not too far away. And I went over to have a look at it. And as far as I'm aware, I was the only person that went over to see it physically. And when I saw it, it was painted green. I call it frog green, but an awful green colour. But I knew underneath that, everything was really in pretty good condition. So I was prepared to bid, within reason, whatever it took. It turns out that it was an ex-technical college lathe, which is kind of what I thought it would be. They're a bit small for a commercial machine shop. It's been chewed up a little bit here and there where the students have run into the chuck and so on, but no serious damage. But there's really not too much wear on it either, because they don't really get hammered when they're in colleges. They just get knocked about, but they don't get worn out. When I went to see it, I wasn't sure what I would get with it, but luckily the 3-jaw and the 4-jaw chucks were there, and a few other bits, but the spindle bush was missing, the bush that converts from 3 Morse taper to 4.5 Morse taper. There wasn't a faceplate, but there was enough there. There was a driving plate, and so I've had to build up my accessories really from there. Anyway, having won it on eBay, you know, bidding in the last sort of 5 seconds, which is what you do, I had to organise transport. It weighs about 550 kilos, so a bit over half a ton. And the seller, he had a fabrication shop and he had a forklift, so he could lift it onto onto a flatbed or whatever for me. But he couldn't transport it, so I started phoning around to get quotes for transport, and I went to various commercial organisations, and I wasn't happy with the price. But I found a local company, a local removals company with a Luton box van and a tail lift, and I spoke to the owner of that company. They're a fairly well established local removals company here, and I said, you know, could you move this lathe? And he said, oh sure, we do this all the time. It's, oh yeah, we do house clearances, it's no problem at all. But actually when the guys did come to deliver it, they were like, how the heck are we going to move this thing? But the seller loaded it onto the Luton van with his forklift, and at this end we did pretty much the same as we did later on with the shaper, if you've seen that video. We lowered the Luton tail lift down to the door level and then slid it across on rollers. When it arrived, my first job was to strip it, clean it, paint it, and you can see these grease nipples here on the gearbox and similar grease nipples elsewhere, and there's a big sign which says do not grease this machine other than the motor bearings. Use Tellus 33 oil, I think it is. But whoever was doing the maintenance in the technical college somehow couldn't read that, and the whole thing, all of the sliding surfaces and this gearbox was absolutely caked in grease. It was solid inside with grease, and dirt had attached to that. It didn't seem to cause excessive wear, but it was in such a mess, and I spent so much time just getting all that grease off, and everything really had to be stripped down. When I got the lid off, I found the gearbox was in excellent order, so the students crashing the gears as they do hadn't caused much damage at all. Within a few days of it arriving, I had to see if it worked, and I don't have three-phase here, so very quickly I needed to get myself an inverter and just rig it up and make sure the thing would run smoothly, and indeed it did. It ran very quietly indeed. It doesn't have the original motor. This lathe dates from about 1971, I think. I believe it has a motor which was fitted, I think, probably in the early 2000s, and it's a good motor. So by way of introduction, I don't think there's much more to say. When I got this lathe, I wasn't taking video really at the time, and so what I have is a collection of stills which I'll try to make as interesting as possible, running through everything that I did to get it into a good and working condition. So I hope you find that useful. Some rattling I need to sort out, but otherwise that motor is lovely and quiet. Listen to it. I hope you enjoyed the pictures. I want to say something about the screw cutting gearbox on this lathe. Although the lathe is metric, the gearbox itself is imperial, and Harrison provided the metric screw cutting by having a metric lead screw, and also by adding this extra knob here, which gives additional ratios for metric screw cutting. But this part of the gearbox is really the original imperial gearbox. When you're setting metric screw cutting pitches, you operate according to this table, and it sends you all over the place, you know, left, right, for the knobs, and various positions across here, jumping all over the place, because that's where they're picking up the metric pitches. But when you're using it as an imperial screw cutting gearbox in its original designed intention, and you use the additional gears, the 40 tooth gear and the 63 tooth gear, which I bought as additional gears. And when you're using those gears, the gearbox steps by 1 TPI for each position of this lever sequentially. So 8 TPI, if you're on the lowest scale, 8 TPI, 9 TPI, 9.5 TPI, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And these provide doublers. So as you set these, it would be 15, 30 or 60 at this far end here. Because the lead screw is metric, 6mm pitch, it means when cutting imperial threads, you can't use the dial indicator here to re-engage the half nuts onto the lead screw, to re-engage the drive, in other words. You've got to leave the drive, the screw cutting half nuts fully engaged, and when you come to the end of a cut, when cutting the thread, you have to stop the lathe, back off the tool, put the lathe in reverse and let the saddle move away from the thread that you're cutting, but without disengaging the half nut, because you'd never find your place again. When you're cutting metric threads, it's fine, you can use the usual guide and this dial to re-engage the half nuts in the right place. And I think most people are familiar with that, those steps that have to be made when using an imperial lathe to cut metric or vice versa. I made up this chart so I know all the knob positions and lever positions to get the metric and imperial threads, and also the little table below shows what gears I need for metric and imperial threads. But I had enough information to work backwards and figure out exactly what the gearing was between the spindle and the lead screw for every position in the gearbox. Now, it didn't really help me with imperial, I didn't need to know it, but for metric I could then work out if there are any pitches that were not listed on the plate on the side of the machine. I don't expect you to be able to read this, but even when I get it the right way up, in green, highlighted there, are all the positions that are listed on the plate on the side of the machine, but the orange highlighted cells are showing pitches which are valid metric pitches but were not listed on the side of the machine. It doesn't help me a lot. I haven't gained some new pitch that was unknown to science. It's purely that I can get a couple of extra pitches without changing gear wheels, because I found duplicates which were in a different range. As I mentioned, I built up my accessories, having got some of the basics with the lathe, the two chucks. And one thing I wanted was a spindle nose protector. And I thought about making one, but it was looking a bit complicated. But then I looked online, I thought about 3D printing, and I found a description model, a description file for a nose protector that somebody had made and posted on the internet, free to anybody. And I had that file then, downloaded that file, and I went onto another site which is like a broker for getting 3D printing done. And I uploaded the design, and then that brought in pricing from many different companies who were prepared to give me the price for 3D printing. And in fact, Windows, I think now, certainly then, had a built-in quote system for 3D printing. And so I ended up with this. In fact, I got two. I only ordered one, but two arrived, and one in two different forms of plastic. Actually, the other one is better than this, but never mind. And it just does what you'd expect. The key engages in one of these slots, and you just wind it on. But it's amazing to think that I just downloaded that as a free computer file, got quotes from my armchair, and two of them arrived in the post, and it fits perfectly. Another item worth a mention is this bed stop, which I bought from the internet. And there's a guy who makes these for various different lathes device. It won't stop the carriage from moving, but it will give me a stop to work up against. If the carriage's drive is engaged, it will just push this along the bed, and then you'd still get the expected disaster when the tool hits the chuck. But it's certainly good enough to work up against as a stop by eye, and make that last bit of the cut by hand. So a really nice bit of kit, and people pay crazy money for the original micrometer stops, and this is, for what I need, this is absolutely fine. So that brings me to the end of my video on the Harrison 140 lathe. Lovely lathe, I've had great fun with it, perfect for me. Thank you for watching Hacksby Shed.